Philadelphia's Academy of Natural Sciences received an urgent letter in March of 1863 that would challenge everything its members believed about human intellect. The letter described a 9-year-old colored girl in a contraband camp outside Alexandria, Virginia, who could recite entire medical textbooks after hearing them once, solve complex mathematical equations without instruction, and speak fluent Latin despite never having formal schooling. The Academy's lead researcher, Dr. Samuel Caldecott, initially dismissed it as abolitionist propaganda. But when 3 separate military officials confirmed the account, adding that the girl had correctly diagnosed a camp physician's medication errors and saved 2 soldiers' lives, Caldecott became obsessed with proving this impossible. According to his private journals, discovered decades later in a sealed section of the Academy's archives, what he found in that camp would force him to destroy years of his own research and vanish from public life entirely. Before we continue with the story of Eliza Davis and the scientist who tried to explain her, I want to ask you something. If you're interested in true historical mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about the past, subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, what state or city are you listening from right now? I'm curious to know where our community of history lovers is based. Now let's discover what really happened in that spring of 1863. The contraband camps surrounding Alexandria, Virginia in early 1863 were monuments to chaos and hope intertwined. Following President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that January, thousands of formerly enslaved people flooded into Union-controlled territories seeking protection behind federal lines. The camps sprawled across muddy fields and abandoned warehouses, shelter constructed from whatever materials could be salvaged, rotted canvas, splintered boards, rusted metal sheets. The air perpetually carried the smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the sweet sick scent of illness that hung over the medical tents like a fog. In one of these camps, designated simply as Camp Relief No. 7, a peculiar situation had developed that spring. The camp housed approximately 240 souls, most of them women and children whose men had either died, been sold away, or joined the colored troops regiments forming throughout Union territory. Among them was a girl named Eliza Davis, who had arrived 3 weeks earlier with a group of refugees from a tobacco plantation outside Richmond that had been burned during a Confederate retreat. Eliza was small for her 9 years, her frame thin in the way of children who had known hunger intimately. Her skin was dark as polished walnut, her hair kept in tight braids under a faded calico headscarf. She possessed the kind of face that might have been unremarkable in any other context. Large, watchful eyes, a small nose, lips that rarely smiled. But those eyes held something that made adults uncomfortable when they looked too long. They were eyes that absorbed everything, that seemed to be constantly calculating, measuring, recording. The first person to notice Eliza's peculiar abilities was Lieutenant James Carmichael, a young officer from Massachusetts assigned to camp administration. Carmichael had been tasked with conducting a census of the camp's inhabitants, recording names, approximate ages, origins, and any useful skills. It was tedious work, made more difficult by the fact that many of the refugees were illiterate and traumatized, their stories emerging in fragments and contradictions. When Carmichael called for Eliza Davis, the girl approached his makeshift desk with downcast eyes, as was expected. Her designated guardian, an older woman named Ruth, who had traveled with her from Richmond, stood protectively nearby. "Name?" Carmichael asked, his pen poised. "Eliza, sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Family name?" "Davis, sir." That was master's name. "Age?" 9 years, sir. Born in spring of '54. Carmichael continued with his standard questions, but something made him pause. On his desk lay a book he'd been reading that morning. Gray's Anatomy, a medical text he studied in hopes of better understanding the illnesses ravaging the camp. The book was open to a detailed illustration of the human heart, its chambers and vessels labeled in Latin. Eliza's eyes had fixed on the page with unmistakable hunger. "Can you read, girl?" Carmichael asked, though he knew the answer. Teaching slaves to read was illegal throughout the South, punishable by whipping or worse. Eliza didn't respond immediately. Ruth shifted nervously behind her. "It's all right," Carmichael said more gently. "You're free now. There's no punishment for learning here." "No, sir. I can't read," Eliza whispered, "but I can see the pictures." "What do you see?" Eliza's finger moved toward the page, then pulled back, as if touching it might burn her. "That's the heart, sir. The aorta carries blood from the ventriculus sinister. The left ventricle to the body. The vena cava brings it back. The right side pushes blood to the lungs through the arteria pulmonalis. Carmichael's pen clattered to the desk. How do you know those terms? Eliza finally looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something like resignation, as if she knew her answer would only bring trouble. Master's son was studying to be a doctor, sir, before the war. He used to read his books aloud to remember them better. I would clean his room while he studied. And you memorized medical terminology from overhearing it? I remember everything I hear, sir. Every word. Carmichael spent the next hour testing this claim, pulling various refugees aside to speak in Eliza's presence, then asking her to repeat what they'd said. She reproduced conversations word for word, including dialect and pronunciation, even when they spoke in German or French. When he read passages from his medical text aloud, she could recite them back flawlessly, including complex anatomical descriptions she could not possibly understand. But it was what happened next that truly unsettled Carmichael. He asked Eliza to explain what the passages meant. She did. Not in the halting way of someone repeating memorized words, but with genuine comprehension. She described the circulatory system, the function of organs, the process of respiration, using the medical terminology correctly and explaining concepts that should have required years of formal education to grasp. When Carmichael mentioned that one of the camp physicians had been puzzled by a patient's symptoms, Eliza asked 3 questions about the case, then suggested the man likely suffered from pleurisy complicated by malnutrition and recommended a specific treatment protocol. The diagnosis was correct. The recommended treatment worked. Within a week, Lieutenant Carmichael's report had reached his commanding officer, then traveled up the chain to the Department of War in Washington. In the fevered political atmosphere of 1863, with the war's outcome still uncertain and the question of what to do with millions of freed slaves becoming increasingly urgent, Eliza Davis represented something potentially explosive. Living proof that the racial theories justifying slavery were scientifically false. The South's entire social order rested on the belief that Negroes were intellectually inferior, incapable of higher reasoning, suited only for manual labor under white supervision. Northern scientists, even many abolitionists, largely accepted this view, though they argued it resulted from lack of education rather than innate deficiency. But a 9-year-old colored girl who could match or exceed the intellectual capacity of educated white men who possessed abilities that seemed to transcend normal human cognition entirely. This was something else. This was dangerous. Dr. Samuel Caldecott received the War Department's request to investigate on April 3, 1863. Caldecott was 47 years old, a respected member of Philadelphia's Academy of Natural Sciences, and one of America's leading practitioners of craniology, the study of skull measurements to determine intellectual capacity and racial characteristics. He had published extensively on the topic, his work frequently cited in defenses of slavery. His measurements proved that Negro skulls were smaller, particularly in the frontal regions associated with higher reasoning, and that their brain structures resembled those of apes more than white humans. The request came with unusual stipulations. Caldecott was to examine the girl in complete secrecy, share his findings only with specific military officials, and above all, prevent any public knowledge of the case. The War Department understood the implications. If abolitionists got hold of this story, it would become powerful propaganda. If Southern sympathizers learned of it, they would demand the girl's suppression by any means necessary. Caldecott departed for Alexandria on April 6th, bringing his instruments: calipers for skull measurement, scales for brain weight estimation, phrenological charts, intelligence assessment tools, and an extensive library of racial science texts. He also brought his assistant, a young medical student named William Driscoll, and a stenographer to record every detail of the examination. They arrived at Camp Relief No. 7 on a gray morning, when spring rain turned the camp's pathways into rivers of mud. The camp's medical officer, Dr. Marcus Lindley, met them with barely concealed skepticism. Lindley was a practical man who had seen too much suffering to have patience for scientific theory. "The girl is remarkable," Lindley told them as he led them to the tent where Eliza was kept under quiet observation. "I've tested her myself extensively. Her abilities are beyond anything in medical literature." "Everything has a rational explanation, Doctor," Caldecott replied. "I suspect we'll find this is a case of highly developed memory combined with mimicry." Some individuals of inferior races can be trained to perform complex tasks without truly understanding them, much like a parrot can speak without comprehension. Lindley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The tent serving as Eliza's quarters was small but clean, with a cot, a chair, and a small table. Eliza sat on the cot, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a simple gray dress that had been donated by a ladies' aid society. Ruth, her guardian, sat in the corner, watching the white men with the wariness of someone who knew exactly how dangerous such attention could be. Caldecott's first impression, recorded meticulously in his journal, was of the girl's unremarkable appearance. Subject presents as typical Negro child of approximately 9 years, he wrote. Small stature, likely due to malnutrition common to her race and former condition. Physical examination reveals no obvious abnormalities. Subject is compliant and quiet, exhibiting the docility expected of her kind. Then Eliza looked up at him, and Caldecott's pen paused. "Good morning, Doctor." "Caldecott," Eliza said softly. "Dr. Lindley mentioned you studied in Edinburgh under Robert Knox. I heard him read some of your papers. You believe Negro skull capacity averages approximately 5 cubic inches less than Caucasian skulls, primarily in the frontal region, which you associate with reasoning and moral sense." Caldecott stared at her. "How could you possibly know where I studied?" "Dr. Lindley told Lieutenant Carmichael yesterday afternoon, sir, at 2:47 in the afternoon specifically. You were speaking about the Knox controversy and his involvement in the Burke and Hare murders. The lieutenant asked if that troubled you, given Knox's contributions to anatomy. You said science must be separated from scandal. This was impossible, Doctor." Lindley confirmed the conversation had occurred exactly as described at approximately that time, but it had taken place in his office, over 200 yards from this tent. "You couldn't have heard us," Caldecott said. "Sound carries in camps like this, sir," Eliza replied, "especially when the wind comes from the east, like it did yesterday. I hear many conversations." Over the next 6 hours, Caldecott conducted the most rigorous intellectual examination of his career. He started with simple memory tests, reading passages from various texts and asking Eliza to repeat them. She reproduced every word flawlessly, including material in Latin, Greek, French, and German, languages she claimed never to have studied formally. Then he moved to comprehension tests. He read complex philosophical arguments from Kant and Hegel, mathematical proofs from Euclid, medical descriptions from the most advanced texts of the era. After each passage, he asked Eliza to explain what she had heard. She didn't just explain, she analyzed. She found logical inconsistencies in philosophical arguments. She identified mathematical errors in published proofs. She questioned medical assumptions that Caldecott himself had never thought to challenge, asking why physicians assumed certain treatments worked when the physiological mechanism remained unexplained. "Bloodletting for fever," she said during one exchange. Dr. Rush advocated it extensively during the yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia in 1793. "But I've heard Dr. Lindley's medical texts. They say blood carries oxygen to tissues. If someone has a fever, their body is fighting infection. Why remove the blood that carries resources to fight the disease? Wouldn't that weaken them further?" Caldecott had no answer. The medical establishment still debated bloodletting's efficacy, but Eliza's question cut to a fundamental logical problem that most physicians ignored. As the examination continued, Caldecott's careful scientific detachment began to crack. He moved to arithmetic, complex calculations, algebra, geometric proofs. Eliza solved them instantly, often providing answers before he finished writing the problems. When he gave her a problem deliberately constructed with no solution, she identified the logical impossibility within seconds and explained why. "Try music," Dr. Lindley suggested. He had brought a violin. "Can you identify these notes, Eliza?" Lindley played a complex sequence: B-flat, D, F-sharp, A, C, E-flat. Eliza said immediately, "That's from Mozart's Requiem, Confutatis Maledictus, bars 43 through 48. But you played the F-sharp slightly flat, about a quarter tone." Lindley's hand trembled on the bow. "I've never played that piece where you could hear it. Master's daughter played piano, sir. She practiced Mozart's Requiem for her wedding. That was 2 years ago in the summer. She played it 47 times before the wedding. I remember all of them." 2 years ago. Caldecott's voice was sharp. "You can recall a musical sequence you heard once, 2 years ago?" "I remember everything, sir. Every sound, every word, every face, I can't forget even when I want to. The implications of this statement hung in the tent like smoke. To remember everything, every moment, every sensation, every piece of information ever encountered, without the merciful dulling of memory that protected human minds from being overwhelmed by the past. What would that be like? What kind of burden would that create? Caldecott spent the next 2 hours attempting to find the limits of Eliza's abilities. There appeared to be none. Her memory was perfect and permanent. Her comprehension was immediate. Her analytical capacity exceeded that of educated adults with decades of training. She could hold multiple complex ideas in her mind simultaneously and draw connections between disparate fields of knowledge that took specialists years to develop. By late afternoon, Caldecott's assistant, William Driscoll, was openly disturbed. "Sir, this is beyond anything in the literature. This isn't just intelligence. This is something else entirely." Caldecott's response was to begin the physical examination. If the girl's abilities couldn't be explained by intellectual inferiority, perhaps they could be explained by physical abnormality. He measured Eliza's skull with calipers, recording dimensions from every angle. He examined her head for unusual bumps or depressions according to phrenological principles. He tested her reflexes, her vision, her hearing. Everything was normal. Her skull measurements fell within typical ranges for her age and sex. There were no physical abnormalities to explain her capabilities. "Perhaps," Driscoll suggested quietly, "the theories are wrong." Caldecott whirled on him. "The theories are based on hundreds of measurements, thousands of observations, decades of scientific research. They cannot simply be wrong. But if this girl is an anomaly, an outlier. Every distribution has outliers, Driscoll. They don't invalidate the fundamental principles." Yet even as he said it, Caldecott knew he was lying to himself. He had spent his career building a scientific framework to prove Negro intellectual inferiority. That framework rested on the assumption that such inferiority was innate, biological, immutable. But here was a Negro child who had received no formal education, who had grown up in slavery's most brutal conditions, yet possessed cognitive abilities that exceeded anything Caldecott had ever encountered in any human being of any race. If she was possible, what else was possible? How many other enslaved people possessed hidden capabilities, suppressed by a system designed to prevent their development? How many potential scholars, scientists, artists, leaders had been crushed under slavery's weight? And if the theories about Negro intellectual inferiority were wrong, what did that say about the scientific legitimacy of slavery itself? These thoughts terrified Caldecott more than any ghost story ever could, because they threatened to demolish the intellectual edifice of his entire career. As evening fell, Dr. Lindley provided Caldecott and Driscoll with quarters in the camp's medical section. Caldecott couldn't sleep. He sat at a small desk, reviewing his notes by candlelight, trying to find some explanation that would preserve his theoretical framework. Around midnight, he heard something unusual. A voice, young and female, speaking Latin with perfect pronunciation. He followed the sound to the medical tent. Inside, Eliza stood beside a cot where a soldier lay in the delirium of severe infection. "Doctor." Lindley was there as well, along with 2 exhausted orderlies. The soldier had been injured 3 days earlier, his leg wound, festering despite treatment. He was expected to die by morning. "The drainage is purulent and foul-smelling," Eliza was saying in English now, her voice clinically detached. "That indicates anaerobic infection. The texts describe it. Clostridium perfringens, though they don't know the name yet. It produces gas in the tissue. You can feel crepitus here." She gestured to the soldier's leg. "The tissue is dying. Gangrene." "We know it's gangrene," Lindley said wearily. "We're preparing to amputate in the morning." "You'll be too late. The infection is spreading to his bloodstream. You can see the red lines." She pointed to barely visible streaks extending up the soldier's thigh. "That's lymphangitis. The infection is moving toward his torso. By morning it will be systemic. Amputation won't save him. Then he's going to die," Lindley said flatly. "Maybe not." Eliza moved to a cabinet of medical supplies. "I heard you reading about carbolic acid 2 weeks ago, from Joseph Lister's paper. He proposes it as an antiseptic. You have some here, don't you?" Lindley stared at her. "Lister's work is controversial. Most surgeons reject it, And yes, I have a small quantity, but I've never used it. Use it now. Clean the wound with diluted carbolic solution. Remove all the dead tissue. You have to debride aggressively, even if it means cutting deep. Then pack the wound with carbolic dressing. It might kill the infection before it reaches his heart. That's insane, one of the orderlies muttered. The carbolic will cause terrible pain. He's already dying, Eliza said simply. This gives him a chance. Dr. Lindley looked at Caldecott, who had been watching from the tent's entrance. What do you think, Doctor? Caldecott wanted to say no. He wanted to dismiss the girl's suggestion as dangerous, as the presumption of an ignorant child playing with concepts she couldn't understand. But he had watched her all day. He had tested her relentlessly. And he knew, with a certainty that made him physically ill, that she understood the medical situation better than anyone else in that tent. Try it, he heard himself say. The next 2 hours were brutal. They cleaned the soldier's wound with carbolic solution while he screamed against the leather strap between his teeth. They cut away dead tissue, going deeper than conventional wisdom suggested, following Eliza's instructions. They packed the wound with carbolic-soaked bandages and waited. By dawn, the soldier's fever had broken. The red lines had stopped advancing. He was weak, delirious with pain, but alive. Over the next week, his wound would begin to heal. He would lose some muscle tissue in his leg, but keep the limb. He would survive. Eliza had saved his life with knowledge that the medical establishment wouldn't widely accept for another decade. That morning, Caldecott wrote a preliminary report to the War Department. His hand shook as he formed the words. Subject demonstrates cognitive capabilities that exceed current scientific understanding. Memory appears to be eidetic and comprehensive. Comprehension and analytical reasoning operate at a level inconsistent with subject's age, education, and racial category. Physical examination reveals no abnormalities that would account for these abilities. Further study is required to determine. He paused. To determine what? Whether his entire scientific career had been built on false premises, whether the racial theories justifying slavery were elaborate lies that brilliant men had convinced themselves to believe. Sir? Driscoll stood in the doorway. The War Department has sent additional instructions. The new orders were brief and chilling. Continue examination. Determine extent of subject's abilities. Identify limitations. Assess potential applications. Maintain absolute secrecy. Do not allow subject to interact with anyone not specifically authorized. Under no circumstances permit subject's existence to become public knowledge. The orders came with a dark implication that Caldecott understood immediately. The War Department wasn't interested in scientific truth. They were interested in control. Eliza Davis was a weapon, or a threat, or both. But she was not to be allowed to simply exist as a free human being with extraordinary gifts. Over the following weeks, Caldecott's examination of Eliza intensified. He brought in additional researchers, all sworn to secrecy. They tested her in mathematics, astronomy, linguistics, biology, chemistry, history, philosophy, music, and art. In every domain, she demonstrated capabilities far beyond her supposed limitations. She could calculate astronomical positions without instruments. She could speak languages she'd only heard spoken once. She could identify chemical compounds by smell. She could memorize entire books after a single reading and recite them years later without error. She could solve problems in minutes that had taken mathematicians years to crack. But the tests took a toll. Eliza grew thinner, quieter. The light in her eyes dimmed. She never complained, never protested. But Ruth, her guardian, reported that Eliza barely slept anymore. When she did sleep, she had nightmares. She remembers everything, sir, Ruth told Dr. Lindley during one of these conversations, which Caldecott overheard. Every lashing she saw, every child sold away from their mother, every scream, every tear, every horror. She can't forget none of it. It's all there in her head forever, fresh as the day it happened. How does a child live with that? The question haunted Caldecott. He had been studying Eliza as a scientific specimen, a puzzle to be solved. But she was a child who had experienced slavery's full brutality and who possessed the terrible curse of remembering it all perfectly, unable to let trauma fade into merciful forgetfulness. In early May, something changed. Caldecott arrived at the camp to find unusual activity. Soldiers moving in formation, officers in hushed conferences. Dr. Lindley met him with a grim expression. Confederate raid last night, Lindley explained. 20 miles south of here. They hit another contraband camp, burned it completely, killed or captured everyone there. Why would they raid a contraband camp? Driscoll asked. Because word is spreading, Lindley said quietly. About Eliza. We've kept it quiet, but information leaks. There are rumors of a Negro girl with impossible abilities. Southern sympathizers want her eliminated before abolitionists turn her into propaganda. Confederate intelligence wants her captured to prove the rumors are abolitionist lies. Everyone wants to control her or destroy her. That night, Caldecott made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He went to Eliza's tent and spoke to her directly, without witnesses, without his scientific instruments, without the careful detachment he'd maintained. The tent was dimly lit by a single candle, casting long shadows against the canvas walls. Eliza sat on her cot, a worn book in her lap, one of the primers from the camp school. Ruth dozed in the corner, exhausted from another day of caring for sick children in the medical tent. When Caldecott entered, Eliza looked up, but didn't seem surprised. It was as if she had been expecting him. "Eliza," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I need to ask you something honestly. Do you understand what you are? What your abilities mean?" She looked at him with those two old eyes that had seen things no child should remember and couldn't forget. "I understand that I'm dangerous, sir. That's why everyone's afraid. You're not dangerous. You're extraordinary. They're the same thing, sir, for someone like me." She closed the book carefully, her small fingers tracing its spine. "When you're a Negro and you're extraordinary, you become a problem. Either you prove something people don't want to believe, or you become something they want to own and control. I learned that on the plantation. Master's son had a hunting dog once, a pointer that was smarter than any dog he'd ever seen. Could track anything, understand complex commands, almost seemed to think like a person. One day, a visiting planter offered a fortune for that dog. Master's son refused. The next week, the dog disappeared. They found it 3 days later, shot dead in the woods. Master's son cried for a week, but his father told him it was a mercy. "Something that valuable and that smart," he said. "It would have been stolen eventually or caused trouble. Better to end it quick than let it suffer what would come." Caldecott felt ice in his stomach. "You think someone will kill you? I think someone will try to use me until I break, or they'll kill me to keep others from using me. Either way, I don't get to just be Eliza." She paused, then added quietly, "Dr. Lindley told me about the raids, about camps being burned. He didn't say it was because of me, but I know. I hear things. People whisper about the Negro girl who knows too much. Some think I'm blessed by God. Others think I'm unnatural. The Confederates think I'm abolitionist propaganda. The Union thinks I'm a political complication. Nobody thinks I'm just a child who wants to live. What do you want, Eliza? If you could have anything, what would it be?" For the first time since he'd met her, Eliza's carefully controlled expression cracked. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall, as if even crying was something she had learned to suppress. "I want to forget, sir. Just for one day. I want to forget everything I've seen and heard and felt. I want to be a regular child who doesn't remember her mother's face when Master sold her, who doesn't remember exactly what she said. Be good, baby girl, be good, and maybe we see each other in heaven. Or the sound of the chains, or the way she tried not to cry because crying made Master angry and he'd beat her. I don't want to remember the night Master's overseer came to the quarters and took Jenny, who was only 14, and I heard everything through the walls, and I remember her crying and his laughing, and I can never ever forget it, even though I want to, even though I pray every night to forget just that one thing." Her voice had risen slightly, and Ruth stirred in the corner. Eliza immediately quieted, glancing at her guardian with concern. When she continued, her voice was barely a whisper. "I remember every person I ever saw whipped, every child sold, every woman who disappeared into Master's house at night and came out different. I remember the exact words of the auctioneer when they sold my baby brother. Good breeding stock, strong back, prime field hand potential. He was 6 years old. I remember the man who bought him saying, 'He'll last maybe 15 years if I work him right, then I'll breed him and get my investment back.' I remember my brother's face. He didn't cry. He was too scared to cry. And I remember everything, Dr. Caldecott. Every single moment of horror, and I can't forget any of it. That's what my gift really is, perfect memory of every nightmare I've ever lived." Caldecott felt something break inside him. All his life he had pursued scientific truth with clinical detachment. He had measured skulls and recorded data and built theories about racial hierarchies, all while maintaining the comfortable distance of academic inquiry. But sitting across from this child, hearing her describe the unbearable weight of memory, he understood something that no amount of scientific study had taught him. The human cost of the system he had spent years trying to justify. "I can't give you forgetting," he said finally. "Nobody can." "I know, sir. Nobody can. But I can do something else. I can make sure you're not treated as a specimen anymore. That you're allowed to be a child as much as possible. That your abilities are yours, not something for others to exploit." "Can you really do that, sir?" There was something heartbreaking in the way she asked. Not hope exactly, but a desperate wish to believe that someone with power might actually help her rather than use her. Caldecott wasn't sure he could, but watching this brilliant, damaged child who carried the weight of perfect memory, he knew he had to try. "Yes, I'll find a way. What about your research, sir? Your theories? What about them? If you help me hide, you can't publish what you found. You'll have to lie in your report. Your colleagues will think you failed. Your reputation..." "My reputation is built on measuring skulls to prove that people like you are inferior," Caldecott interrupted, surprising himself with the bitterness in his voice. "Meeting you has taught me that my entire career is built on a foundation of lies we told ourselves to justify slavery. Maybe I deserve to lose that reputation." Eliza studied him with those ancient eyes. "You could publish the truth about me and become famous. You'd prove that Negroes can be just as intelligent as white people, maybe more. You'd help the abolition cause, and destroy you in the process. The moment I publish, you become the most famous Negro in America. Every scientist will want to study you. Every politician will want to use you as evidence for their position. Southern sympathizers will want you dead. Abolitionists will want you as a symbol. You'll never have privacy or peace or the chance to be anything except a specimen and a symbol. Is that what you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands. "No, sir. I just want to learn things without being tested. I want to help people without being displayed. I want to be Eliza without everyone needing me to represent all Negro people everywhere. But what about all the others still in slavery who might have abilities like mine? Or different abilities? What about proving that we're not inferior?" It was a question that would haunt Caldecott for the rest of his life. "The war will prove that," he said, though he wasn't certain he believed it. "When Negroes fight as soldiers, work as free laborers, build their own communities, lead their own lives, the truth will emerge through 1,000 smaller examples. Maybe not as dramatically as you could prove it, but more sustainably. You don't have to carry that burden alone. You shouldn't have to." "But I could help," Eliza insisted. "If I let them study me, if I let them prove, they would break you." Caldecott's voice was harder than he intended. "I've seen what happens to medical curiosities, Eliza. I've studied cases. There was a boy in Boston 10 years ago who could calculate faster than any adult. A mathematical prodigy. Scholars studied him constantly, testing him, pushing him, writing papers about him. By the time he was 15, he had suffered a complete mental collapse. He spent the rest of his life in an asylum, unable to perform even simple arithmetic. The constant examination, the pressure to perform, the lack of any normal childhood, it destroyed him. And he was white, from a good family, protected by wealth and social position. What do you think they would do to you? A Negro girl with no legal protection, no family with influence, no resources. No, they would use you until you broke, and then they would either discard you or claim that your breakdown proved their theories about racial inferiority after all." Eliza's hands were shaking slightly. "So, either I hide what I am, or I let them destroy me. I'm giving you a third option. I'm going to lie in my report. I'm going to say you're interesting but unremarkable. That your abilities are overstated. That further study is unnecessary. And I'm going to arrange for you and Ruth to go north, to a Quaker school where you can learn in peace, where you'll be protected, where you can be a child who happens to be brilliant rather than a scientific specimen. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternatives. And if they come looking for me anyway, then we'll hide you again. Change your name, move you somewhere else, keep you safe." He leaned forward. "Eliza, I can't give you forgetting. I can't undo what you've experienced or erase your memories, but I can try to make sure that from this moment forward you have a chance at a life worth remembering for the right reasons." For the first time since he'd met her, Eliza smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, barely visible in the candlelight, but it was real. "Thank you, Dr. Caldecott. Don't thank me yet. We still have to make this work. Over the next 3 days, Caldecott threw himself into the deception with the same intensity he had once devoted to his research. He wrote his report to the War Department with meticulous care, phrasing every sentence to suggest disappointment rather than discovery. Subject demonstrates highly developed rote memorization, he wrote, consistent with some documented cases of savant syndrome. However, deeper examination reveals significant limitations in true comprehension and abstract reasoning. Subject can reproduce heard material with impressive fidelity, but shows little evidence of genuine understanding or original thought. Apparent problem-solving abilities appear to result from pattern recognition and mimicry rather than actual reasoning capacity. It was all lies, and Caldecott knew it. But he wrote with scientific authority and clinical detail, providing just enough technical language to discourage further inquiry while avoiding claims that could be easily disproven if someone decided to test Eliza again. He concluded, while subject presents as an interesting case study in memory function, continued extensive examination is not warranted. Subject shows no evidence of capabilities that would challenge current understanding of racial intellectual capacity. Recommend subject be released from special observation and permitted to enter normal educational programs being established for freedmen children. She may benefit from basic education, but does not represent a case requiring further scientific study. Dr. Lindley, when he read the draft, looked at Caldecott with something between respect and concern. This is completely false. Yes, you're sacrificing your greatest scientific discovery to protect her. I'm sacrificing a lie I told myself for years to give a child a chance at life. The War Department may question your findings. They sent you here specifically because of the reports about her abilities. Then I'll tell them the reports were exaggerated, that Lieutenant Carmichael was overly enthusiastic, that witnesses were unreliable, that the girl is bright but not extraordinary. Caldecott met Lindley's eyes. Will you support my conclusion? Lindley was quiet for a moment. Finally, he nodded. I've seen enough suffering in this war. If we can prevent one child from being torn apart by people who want to use her, that's something worth doing. Yes, I'll support your conclusion. Even though it's false, sometimes mercy is more important than truth. Lindley paused. But Caldecott, you realize what this means for you. If you publish this report, you can never write about what you really found. You can never claim credit for discovering the most remarkable mind you've ever encountered. Your career in racial science is effectively over because you'll know that everything you built it on was wrong. I know. Are you prepared for that? Caldecott thought about the question. His entire professional identity had been constructed around racial science, the measurements, the theories, the publications. He had been respected, cited, invited to speak at prestigious institutions. All of that would become hollow once he knew the truth. He could continue in the field, but it would be a lie. Every skull he measured, every conclusion he drew, would be tainted by the knowledge that a 9-year-old Negro girl had proven his life's work false. I don't have a choice, he said finally. I can't unknow what I've learned. I can't pretend Eliza doesn't exist. The only question is what I do with that knowledge, and I choose to protect her, even if it means destroying my career. On May 22, 1863, Caldecott submitted his report to the War Department. 2 days later, he received approval for his recommendations. The reply was brief and bureaucratic, suggesting that the officials were relieved to close the case. A Negro prodigy was a political complication they didn't need while fighting a war. Better to accept Caldecott's disappointing conclusion and move on. But not everyone was satisfied. Caldecott's assistant William Driscoll had witnessed the examinations. He had seen Eliza's abilities firsthand. When he read Caldecott's report, he confronted his mentor in the privacy of their quarters. Sir, this report is fraudulent. You know what we saw. You know what she can do. The report contains my professional conclusions, Caldecott said carefully. Your professionally dishonest conclusions. She solved problems that mathematicians can't solve. She diagnosed medical conditions that experienced physicians missed. She demonstrated perfect memory of information heard once years ago. And you're claiming she's unremarkable? I'm claiming that she doesn't warrant further study. There's a difference. This is your career, Dr. Caldecott. Your reputation. If word gets out that you falsified findings, then my reputation will be ruined, and I'll deserve it. Caldecott looked at his assistant steadily. William, I'm asking you to trust me on this. That girl's life is more valuable than my career. If we publish the truth about her, she'll be destroyed. I can't allow that. Driscoll stared at him. You're serious? Completely. What if I disagree? What if I think the scientific truth is more important than one child's comfort? Then I'll have to ask you to make a choice about the kind of man you want to be. Caldicott's voice was quiet but firm. You can insist on truth and watch a child be torn apart by the system we claim serves knowledge. Or you can accept that sometimes protecting the vulnerable is more important than satisfying curiosity. Choose carefully, William. This is one of those moments that defines a life. Driscoll was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'll support your report, but I want to know what happens to her now. She goes north, to safety, to a life. And we never speak of this again? Not unless you want her blood on your hands. Caldicott arranged Eliza's transportation with the same meticulous care he had once devoted to his experiments. He contacted a Quaker community in Pennsylvania, known for its commitment to freedmen's education and abolitionist principles. He provided funding from his personal savings, enough to ensure Eliza's education and Ruth's support for years. He wrote letters of introduction to colleagues he trusted, abolitionists whose commitment to human dignity exceeded their curiosity about unusual cases. And he gave Eliza one final gift, a new identity. She would travel north as Sarah Mitchell, orphaned daughter of free Negroes from Maryland. The paperwork was forged but expertly done, purchased through channels that Caldicott preferred not to examine too closely. In the chaos of wartime displacement, one more freed child with ambiguous origins would raise no questions. The last time Caldicott saw Eliza was on the morning of May 24, 1863, as she and Ruth boarded a wagon that would take them to a railway station, then north to Pennsylvania. Eliza wore a new frock, plain gray wool, appropriate for a freedman's child, and carried a small carpet bag containing her few possessions. Ruth sat beside her, protective and anxious. The wagon driver was a free Negro man who worked for the Quakers, trusted and discreet. Eliza looked like any other freed child heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future. But when she looked at Caldicott, he saw that same ancient awareness in her eyes. "Dr. Caldicott," she said before climbing into the wagon, "thank you for lying in your report." He started. "How did you—" "I read it, sir. When you left it on the desk while you spoke with Dr. Lindley 3 days ago, I remember every word. You wrote that I was unremarkable, that I couldn't truly understand what I memorized, that my abilities were overstated. You know that's false." "Yes. Why did you lie?" Caldicott struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "Because I realized that scientific truth isn't always the same as human good. Because you deserve a life, not a laboratory. Because everything I believed was wrong, and I didn't want you to be destroyed by my mistakes, or by a system that would see you as a tool rather than a child." Eliza nodded slowly, processing this. "Will you destroy your research? The racial theories?" "I don't know if I can. Other scientists believe them. My destroying my own work won't change the system. But you could tell the truth. You could publish what you found, show everyone that the theories are wrong, that Negro people are just as capable as whites, maybe more. You could change things. If I did that, Eliza, everyone would want to find you and study you. You'd become the most famous Negro in America overnight. Every scientist, every politician, every journalist, every curious person would want to examine you, test you, prove or disprove what you represent. You'd never have privacy or peace. Your entire life would become about being the Negro prodigy, about representing your race, about satisfying other people's need to understand you. Is that what you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the muddy ground. Finally, she shook her head. "No, sir. I just want to be Eliza. Or Sarah, I guess. I just want to learn things and maybe help people and not have everything I do be about proving something to white people who don't believe I'm human enough to be smart." "Then that's what I'll give you. The chance to be yourself. To learn and grow and live without being anyone's specimen or symbol." "But what about all the others, sir? The ones still in slavery who might have abilities like mine, or different abilities? What about proving that Negro people aren't inferior so the system changes?" It was the question that would haunt Caldicott for the rest of his life. The knowledge that his protection of one child might come at the cost of larger truth. that his merciful lie might perpetuate the scientific falsehoods justifying slavery. "The war will prove that," he said, trying to believe his own words. "When Negroes fight as soldiers, work as free laborers, build their own communities, lead their own lives, when thousands and thousands of freed people demonstrate their capabilities, the truth will emerge through lived reality, not through examining one exceptional child. It won't be as dramatic as you could prove it, it won't happen as fast, but it will be more sustainable, more undeniable. You don't have to carry that burden alone. You shouldn't have to. You really believe that? I have to believe it. Because the alternative is sacrificing you for a cause, and I won't do that. You're not a symbol, or a tool, or a piece of evidence. You're Eliza. You're a child. And you deserve a childhood, even if it comes late and isn't what it should have been." Eliza climbed into the wagon slowly. Ruth wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. The driver gathered the reins. As the wagon began to pull away, Eliza looked back once more. "Dr. Caldecott," she called, "will you write down what really happened? Not now, maybe, but someday, so someone knows the truth?" "Yes," he promised. "Someday, when it's safe, I'll write down everything." "So someone knows." She nodded, satisfied. Then the wagon turned a corner, and she was gone. Caldecott stood in the muddy street for a long time after the wagon disappeared, feeling the weight of what he had done. He had betrayed his scientific principles. He had falsified his research. He had lied to his colleagues and superiors. And yet he felt more certain of this choice than anything he had done in his entire career. He returned to Philadelphia 2 days later. His colleagues welcomed him back, curious about his findings in Virginia. He presented his disappointing conclusions with appropriate scientific detachment, an interesting case that ultimately revealed nothing exceptional. Some seemed skeptical, but none questioned him directly. Dr. Samuel Caldecott was too respected, too established to be doubted on his professional judgment. But Caldecott himself was changed. He could no longer look at his research, his publications, his carefully measured skulls without seeing Eliza's face. He began to withdraw from the scientific community, declining invitations to speak, avoiding conferences. When colleagues asked his opinion on racial science questions, he gave vague, non-committal answers. His publications ceased. By 1865, he had quietly resigned from the Academy of Natural Sciences, citing health concerns that were not entirely fabricated. The stress of his double life, maintaining his reputation while knowing it was built on lies, was taking a physical toll. He moved to a small town in upstate New York and never practiced science again. But he continued to follow Eliza's progress through carefully coded letters from his Quaker contacts. And then, in March of 1865, the letters stopped. The first indication that something was wrong came on March 22nd, when Caldecott received a brief, unsigned note delivered by a traveling minister. The message was cryptic. "The bird has flown from the nest. Searching." Caldecott's blood ran cold. The Quakers used such language to protect their correspondence about fugitive slaves and freedmen under threat. "The bird has flown" meant Eliza was missing. He departed for Pennsylvania the next morning, traveling by rail through a landscape still scarred by war. The Confederacy was collapsing. Lee would surrender to Grant in just 3 weeks, but chaos reigned throughout the border states. Deserters, refugees, disbanded military units, and criminal opportunists moved freely through regions where civil authority had broken down. The Quaker school sat on the outskirts of a small town called Redstone, about 40 miles west of Philadelphia. It was a modest 2-story building that had once been a farmhouse, now converted to house and educate approximately 30 freed children. When Caldecott arrived, he found the community in a state of subdued panic. Hannah Pembroke, the school's director, was a stern woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had witnessed too much suffering to be easily shocked. But when she spoke to Caldecott in the privacy of her office, her hands trembled slightly. "Sarah, we knew her as Sarah Mitchell, disappeared on the evening of March 17th, she said. Ruth reported her missing when she didn't return for evening prayers. Sarah had been in the library reading as usual. Ruth said she left her there at approximately 6 o'clock. When she returned at 7, Sarah was gone. The library door stood open. Her book lay on the floor, pages bent. There were signs of some disturbance, a chair overturned, papers scattered, but no blood, no obvious violence. Did anyone see anything? Caldecott asked, his voice tight. Several children reported seeing a carriage in the road near the school that afternoon, black lacquer, pulled by 2 horses. The driver wore a long coat and kept his face covered. One child said she saw 2 men in dark clothing walking near our property line around 5 o'clock. But we often have visitors, and the children didn't think much of it at the time. Have you contacted local authorities? Hannah's expression turned bitter. Yes. The constable came, asked a few questions, wrote in his notebook. Then he told us that freed Negro children run away all the time, that she probably went looking for family or got lured away by promises of work. He said there was nothing to investigate. When I insisted there had been signs of struggle, he asked if anything valuable was stolen. When I said no, he told me that was proof she left voluntarily. He hasn't been back since. What about Ruth? What does she say? Ruth is convinced Sarah was taken. She says Sarah would never leave without telling her. They were inseparable. More than that, Ruth says Sarah had been worried for the past week, said she felt like she was being watched, that she'd seen the same man in town on 3 separate occasions, always standing at a distance, always staring at the school. Did Sarah describe this man? Tall, thin, wearing spectacles, dark hair. Ruth says Sarah mentioned he looked like a schoolteacher or clerk, someone educated. Hannah paused. Ruth also said Sarah told her she'd been having nightmares about being examined again, about men with instruments measuring her head and asking her questions. Sarah made Ruth promise that if anything happened, Ruth would burn a letter Sarah had written and hidden under her mattress. Caldicott's heart clenched. Did Ruth burn it? No. Ruth thought I should see it first. She believed it might help find Sarah. Hannah opened a desk drawer and withdrew a folded piece of paper. I think you should read this, Dr. Caldicott. Sarah mentioned you by name. The letter was written in Eliza's careful, precise handwriting, not the writing of a child, but of someone with perfect control and attention to detail. To whoever finds this, my name is not Sarah Mitchell. That is the name I was given for safety. My real name is Eliza Davis. I am writing this because I am afraid. For the past week, I have been followed. I remember the man's face perfectly. I remember everything. And I've seen him watching our school on March 10th at 2:47 p.m., March 12th at 9:23 a.m., and March 15th at 4:16 p.m. Each time he stands approximately 200 yards away near the elm tree by the road and watches with a spyglass. He writes in a notebook after watching, I believe someone has found out about my abilities and is planning to take me. If I disappear, please tell Dr. Samuel Caldicott of Philadelphia. He will know who I am and what I can do. He tried to protect me by lying in his report and giving me a new name. But I think someone discovered the truth anyway. I don't know if they want to study me or silence me or use me for some purpose I can't imagine. I only know that I am afraid in a way I haven't been since I was in slavery. Dr. Caldicott told me I didn't have to carry the burden of proving Negro intelligence, that I could just be Eliza. But maybe that was never really possible. Maybe extraordinary abilities always make you a target. Maybe I was naive to think I could hide. If something happens to me, I want someone to know. I existed. I could remember everything I ever heard or saw. I could solve problems that adults couldn't solve. I understood things I was never taught. I was not what the scientists said Negro people are. I was proof that the theories are wrong, and whether I live or die, that truth exists. Someone should know it. I am writing this on March 16, 1865, at 11:34 p.m. If you are reading this, it means I was right to be afraid. Eliza Davis, called Sarah Mitchell, age 11 years and 1 month. Caldicott read the letter 3 times, each reading more painful than the last. Eliza's voice came through so clearly, analytical even in her fear, documenting the threat with the same precision she brought to everything, trying to leave evidence because her perfect memory had taught her the importance of records. She had been afraid, and she had been right to be afraid, and Caldicott had failed to protect her. When was this written? He asked, though the letter stated it clearly. The night before she disappeared. Ruth found it the next evening when Sarah didn't come back. So she knew. She knew she was in danger and she stayed anyway. Where could she go? Hannah said gently. She was 11 years old, a freed Negro girl with no legal documents beyond forged papers, no family, no resources. She couldn't run. She could only wait and hope she was wrong. Caldicott stood abruptly, the letter crumpling slightly in his grip. I need to speak with Ruth. and I need to see where Eliza was taken from. Ruth was a broken woman. Caldecott found her in the small room she had shared with Eliza, sitting on the narrow bed, holding one of Eliza's few possessions, a blue ribbon the girl had worn in her hair. When Caldecott entered, Ruth looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "You're him," she said simply. "The doctor from the camp, the one who helped her." "Yes. She's gone. My baby's gone. I couldn't protect her." Ruth's voice broke. "I promised myself when we left that plantation, when we got free, I'd never let nothing happen to her again. But I failed. She's gone and I don't know where, and I can't remember everything like she could. I can't remember the exact face of that man who was watching. I can't help find her because I'm not special like she was." Caldecott sat beside her. "Tell me everything you remember, no matter how small." Over the next hour, Ruth described the days leading up to Eliza's disappearance. The man Eliza had noticed watching, tall, thin, spectacles, dark coat. The way Eliza had grown quieter, more withdrawn. The nightmares that had started a week before she vanished, nightmares where Eliza would wake up gasping, saying she dreamed of laboratories and instruments and men asking her questions she couldn't refuse to answer. "She told me once," Ruth said, "that the worst part of remembering everything is that you can't make nightmares fade. When normal people have bad dreams, they forget the details. But Eliza, she remembered every moment of every nightmare as clear as real life. So every bad dream added to her burden. Every night terror became a permanent memory. She was collecting horrors in her mind with no way to let them go. Did she say anything unusual in the days before she disappeared? Anything that might indicate who was watching her or why?" Ruth thought carefully. "She said something strange on March 16th. We were walking to town for supplies, and she stopped sudden-like, staring at a man across the street. I asked what was wrong. She said, 'That man's coat. I remember that fabric. I heard Dr. Driscoll describing it in Virginia, in the camp. He said his brother was a tailor who made coats from that specific imported wool, navy blue with a subtle gray thread pattern. I only heard him describe it once for maybe 30 seconds, but I remember perfectly. Why would someone wearing that specific fabric be here?" Caldecott's blood froze. "Driscoll, William Driscoll, my assistant. You think he... I don't know, but he witnessed everything. He knew the truth about Eliza's abilities, and he initially argued that we should publish our findings, that scientific truth was more important than her safety. I convinced him to stay silent, but..." Caldecott stood, pacing. "If he told someone else, if he shared our real findings with another researcher or sold the information, why would he do that? Money, fame, professional advancement, or perhaps he genuinely believed that the scientific value outweighed one child's life." Caldecott felt sick. "I trusted him. I thought I had convinced him. But if he betrayed that trust..." He left Ruth and went to examine the library where Eliza had disappeared. It was a small room lined with bookshelves, containing perhaps 200 volumes donated by various benefactors. A single window looked out onto the road. The overturned chair had been righted, but Caldecott could still see the scuff marks on the floor where it had fallen. Papers were scattered near the reading table, pages from a mathematics text covered in Eliza's neat annotations. Hannah stood in the doorway. The constable said this proved nothing, that she might have knocked over the chair herself while leaving. But Caldecott saw what the constable had missed or chosen to ignore. The scuff marks showed the chair had been knocked backwards suddenly, with force. The papers weren't just dropped, they were scattered in a spray pattern suggesting rapid movement or struggle. And on the windowsill, barely visible, were marks that looked like someone had forced the window open from outside. "They came through the window," Caldecott said, "probably while she was absorbed in reading. She was so focused on the book that she didn't hear them until it was too late. She tried to stand, knocked over the chair, scattered the papers. But they overpowered her quickly. She was small, only 11 years old. They probably gagged her to prevent screaming. The whole thing took less than a minute. Then they carried her out through the window. No, look at the floor. No mud tracks near the window despite the rain we had that week. They came in through the window to surprise her, but they left through the door." He pointed to faint marks on the floorboards leading to the door. 2 sets of footprints, both male adult size, and here, he knelt, examining the doorframe. A thread caught on a splinter. Dark wool. Expensive quality. Hannah's face was pale. So this was planned. Professional. Yes, this wasn't random. This was an operation to capture a specific target. Over the next 3 days, Caldecott conducted his own investigation with an intensity bordering on obsession. He hired a private investigator, a former Pinkerton agent named Marcus Webb, who specialized in finding missing persons. He offered a substantial reward for information. He wrote to every contact he had in the medical and scientific communities, carefully probing whether anyone had heard rumors about a Negro prodigy, whether anyone had seen unusual recruitment efforts or strange research proposals. And he confronted William Driscoll. He found his former assistant in Philadelphia, working at Pennsylvania Hospital as a junior physician. When Caldecott appeared in his office unannounced, Driscoll's face showed first surprise, then something that might have been guilt. "Dr. Caldecott, I wasn't expecting. Where is she?" Caldecott's voice was cold, controlled fury. "I don't know what you—" "Don't lie to me, William. Eliza Davis, the girl from Virginia. She disappeared from her school in Pennsylvania on March 17th. The same day a man wearing an expensive wool coat was seen watching her. A coat made from fabric I heard you describe once. So I'll ask again, where is she?" Driscoll's face drained of color. He closed his office door quickly. "Keep your voice down. Tell me what you did." "I didn't do anything. I kept my promise. I never published our findings. I never told anyone the truth about her abilities." "Then why was someone wearing your brother's tailored coat watching her?" Driscoll was silent for a long moment. Finally, he sank into his chair. "I swear I didn't tell anyone directly, but—" He rubbed his face. "Last fall, I was at a medical conference in Boston. I'd been drinking. Another researcher was discussing racial intelligence theories, citing your work. I got angry. I said, God help me, I said that the theories were wrong, that I'd seen evidence that would overturn everything. I didn't give details. I didn't name the girl or the location. I just said I'd witnessed a case that proved Negro intellectual capacity could exceed white capacity." "Who is this researcher?" "Dr. Edmund Voss. He's associated with Harvard Medical School. Studies cognitive development and intelligence assessment. He pressed me for details. I refused to give them, but he was persistent. He asked if you had documented the case. I said you had, but that the documentation was sealed. He asked why. I told him it was to protect the subject." Caldecott felt the room tilt slightly. "You told Edmund Voss that I had documented evidence of exceptional Negro intelligence and then sealed it to protect the subject. You might as well have drawn him a map." "I thought I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. I thought if I just mentioned it existed without giving details, it would be harmless. A way to express my frustration with the theories without actually betraying your trust." "Voss is a collector," Caldecott said, his voice hollow. "He's obsessed with rare cognitive cases. He has funding from wealthy patrons who are fascinated by human oddities. He maintains a private facility in western Maryland where he studies unusual cases. I've heard rumors about that place. Rumors that his subjects don't always leave." Driscoll's face was ashen. "You think Voss took her?" "I think you gave him enough information to start looking, and a man with Voss's resources could find her if he tried hard enough. You told him the case was documented by me. He could have investigated my recent travels, found that I'd been in Virginia in 1863. From there, he could have tracked refugees from that contraband camp, followed the trail to Pennsylvania, found a school with a freedman's girl who was exceptionally bright." Caldecott stood. "You killed her, William. Even if your hand didn't force her through that window, you killed her by talking when you'd promised not to. I didn't mean. No one ever means to. But she's gone anyway." Caldecott moved to the door. "If she dies, William, I want you to remember every day for the rest of your life that it was your drunken pride that killed her. Your need to seem important and knowledgeable. You couldn't stand to keep the secret, so you hinted at it. And now a child is paying the price for your weakness." He left Driscoll weeping in his office. But the confrontation, satisfying as it was, brought Caldecott no closer to finding Eliza. He traveled to Boston to Harvard, trying to track down Edmund Voss. But Voss was elusive. His colleague said he was traveling. His facility in Maryland was remote, unmarked, accessible only by private road. When Caldecott attempted to visit, he was turned away by guards who claimed the property was private and no Dr. Voss was present. Marcus Webb, the investigator, had no better luck. "The trail goes cold after Pennsylvania," he reported. Several witnesses saw a black carriage leaving Redstone on the night of March 17th, heading southeast. But after that, nothing. It's like the earth swallowed them. If they reached Voss's facility, if that's where they went, the girl could be anywhere by now. These places, These private research facilities, they're not accountable to anyone. They can do what they want, and no one asks questions. In late April, just days after Lee's surrender ended the war, Caldecott received a visit from an unexpected source. A man appeared at his door in upstate New York, middle-aged, military-bearing, identifying himself only as Colonel Hayes from the War Department. "Dr. Caldecott, I need to speak with you about your 1863 report on the Negro subject in Virginia." Caldecott's heart sank. That case was closed. It was. But questions have arisen. Another researcher has claimed that your report was falsified, that the subject demonstrated abilities far beyond what you documented. This researcher has petitioned the War Department for permission to locate and re-examine the subject. Who? Dr. Edmund Voss, affiliated with Harvard. He claims to have information suggesting the subject possesses extraordinary cognitive abilities that you deliberately concealed. He argues that such abilities represent a valuable national resource that should be studied for potential applications. "Voss already has her," Caldecott said bitterly. "He doesn't need permission. He took her in March." Hayes's expression didn't change. "We have no evidence of that." "Then investigate. She disappeared from a Quaker school in Pennsylvania. There are witnesses. There's evidence of abduction. Local authorities investigated and found insufficient evidence of foul play, because they don't care about a missing Negro child. Nevertheless," Hayes continued calmly, "without evidence of a crime, we cannot simply raid a legitimate research facility. However, the War Department is interested in determining the truth about your 1863 report. Was it accurate, or did you falsify your findings?" Caldecott found himself at a terrible crossroads. If he admitted to falsifying his report, he would be publicly disgraced, possibly prosecuted. But more than that, he would be confirming to the War Department that Eliza was indeed extraordinarily valuable, which would only intensify efforts to find and exploit her. If he maintained his lie, he preserved his reputation but left Eliza in the shadows with no official interest in finding her. "My report was accurate," he said finally. "The subject was interesting but not exceptional. Dr. Voss is mistaken." "Then why do you believe he took her?" "Because Voss is obsessed with rare cases. Even a moderately unusual subject would interest him. That doesn't mean she's what he thinks she is." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "Dr. Caldecott, the war is ending. The question of what to do with millions of freed slaves is becoming urgent. If there were evidence that Negroes could possess exceptional intelligence, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away, it would have significant political implications. It could strengthen the abolitionist argument. It could help shape Reconstruction policy. Are you certain you want to suppress such evidence for the sake of one child's privacy?" It was the same question Eliza had asked him, the same dilemma that haunted him. One child's life versus larger social change, personal mercy versus political truth. And once again, Caldecott chose the child. "I am certain," he said. "My report stands." Hayes left, unsatisfied but apparently unwilling to press the issue further. The War Department had more pressing concerns than one obscure case from 1863, but Caldecott knew his window for finding Eliza was closing. If Voss had her, if she was in his facility, she was beyond rescue through official channels. No one would investigate. No one would intervene. She would simply disappear into the system of private research. Another subject, in another undocumented study. In desperation, Caldecott made one final attempt. He contacted every abolitionist organization he knew, every Quaker network, every Underground Railroad operative still active. He offered increasingly large rewards for information. He traveled personally to Maryland, trying to find locals who might know about Voss's facility. And then, in late May, he received an anonymous letter. It was brief, written in a hand that suggested limited education. "Doctor, there is a place in western Maryland near Cumberland, an old estate called Thornhill. Dr. Voss uses it for his research. They say he keeps subjects there, studies them in secret. They say a colored girl was brought there in March. I do not know if she is still there, or if she lives. I do not know what is done in that place. But if you are looking for your girl, that is where to look. Do not come yourself. They watch for anyone asking questions. But you should know where to look, should God give you means to save her. A friend." Caldecott stared at the letter until the words blurred. Thornhill, near Cumberland, Maryland. Finally, a specific location. But the warning was clear. Going himself would be dangerous, likely futile. He needed help. He needed people who could infiltrate, who could investigate without raising alarms. He hired Marcus Webb again, this time with a different mission: surveillance and potential extraction. Webb assembled a small team, men experienced in covert operations, former Union soldiers skilled in infiltration. They traveled to Maryland and located Thornhill, an isolated estate surrounded by stone walls, guarded and forbidding. Webb and his team watched the property for 2 weeks. They saw guards patrolling. They saw supply wagons delivering goods. They saw Dr. Voss himself arrive and depart twice. And they saw, through a third-floor window, a small dark-skinned figure moving occasionally past the glass. "Someone's up there," Webb reported when he returned in mid-June. "Can't confirm it's your girl, but there's someone young, someone small being held in that room. The window has bars. The door is locked from outside. It's definitely a captive, not staff or family. Can you extract her?" Webb hesitated. "Possibly, but it would be dangerous. The guards are armed. We'd be breaking into private property, potentially committing kidnapping ourselves if we're wrong about who's in that room. And if things go wrong, if there's violence, if someone gets killed, you'd be implicated, you'd lose everything." "I've already lost everything that matters," Caldecott said. "Can you do it or not?" "We can try. No guarantees." The extraction was planned for June 23, 1865. Webb and his team would infiltrate the estate at night, reach the third floor, extract the captive, and retreat before alarms could be raised. Caldecott waited in a safe house 10 miles away, pacing in agony, imagining every possible disaster. Just before dawn on June 24th, Webb returned. Alone. "We got in," he said wearily. "Reached the third floor, found the room. But doctor..." He paused. The room was empty, recently vacated. There was a cot, a desk, medical equipment, charts on the walls documenting observations, cognitive tests, memory assessments, physical examinations, hundreds of pages of notes, all dated from late March through June 20th, 3 days ago. Was she there? Was it Eliza? The notes don't use her name, just Subject E. "Ah, but the abilities described match what you told me. Perfect memory, extraordinary analytical capacity. The notes detail extensive testing. Some of it..." Webb's jaw tightened. "Some of it wasn't kind, but she was alive as of 3 days ago. Then where is she now?" The notes end abruptly. The final entry says, "Subject shows signs of severe psychological deterioration. Memory remains perfect but emotional stability declining. Nightmares increasing in frequency and intensity. Subject now experiencing difficulty distinguishing memories from present reality. Recommendation: terminate study and relocate subject to appropriate facility." That's the last entry. Appropriate facility, Caldecott repeated numbly. That could mean anything. An asylum. Another research location, or they disposed of her, Webb said bluntly. A subject who's becoming unstable, who's no longer useful for study, who knows too much about what was done to her. That's a liability. Did you find anything else? Any indication where they took her? Nothing. The room was cleaned out thoroughly, but I took the notes, all of them. You should read them. They document everything that was done to her. Every test, every measurement, every... He couldn't continue. Caldecott spent the next week reading through Voss's notes. They were meticulous, clinical, and horrifying in their detachment. Voss had tested Eliza relentlessly, pushing the boundaries of her abilities. He had deprived her of sleep to see if memory formation would be affected. He had subjected her to painful stimuli to test memory of trauma. He had given her impossible problems to solve, recorded her failures alongside her successes, documented her emotional responses with the same clinical precision he used for her cognitive performance. And through it all, threaded through the scientific language, Caldecott could see Eliza breaking. Early entries noted her compliance and resilience. Later entries mentioned resistance, tears, refusal to cooperate. Still later, subject displays increasing dissociation, states she cannot distinguish which memories are from her enslavement, which from the Virginia camp, and which from current captivity. All exist with equal immediacy in her consciousness. Subject reports that past traumas feel as present and real as current experiences. Psychological burden of perfect memory, becoming unsustainable. The final entries were worst of all. Voss noted that Eliza had stopped speaking except to answer direct questions. that she rocked herself at night, that she seemed to be retreating into her own mind, overwhelmed by the accumulation of remembered horrors. And then the abrupt termination. Study ended. Subject relocated. Where? Voss's notes didn't say. Caldecott tried to find him, but Voss had vanished from public life. His position at Harvard was quietly terminated. His facility at Thornhill was sold to new owners who claimed no knowledge of its previous use. The man simply disappeared, taking his records and his secrets with him. In July, Caldecott received one more piece of information. A letter, this time from a Union officer stationed in Maryland during the war's final months. The officer was dying of tuberculosis and wanted to clear his conscience before meeting his judgment. "I was part of a special unit," the officer wrote. "We handled sensitive cases for the War Department. In late March 1865, we received orders to locate and transport a Negro girl who posed a national security risk. We were not told specifics, just that she needed to be secured and transferred to a facility in Maryland for evaluation. We located her at a school in Pennsylvania on March 17th. We extracted her quietly. We were professionals. It was clean and quick. No real violence, though she struggled briefly. We delivered her to the facility as ordered. I believed at the time that she would be studied and released, that this was a matter of wartime security. But afterward I learned the truth. The facility was not government-run. It was a private research institution. The girl was not a security threat. She was a scientific curiosity that someone in the War Department had agreed to provide to a researcher for study. We were unwitting participants in a kidnapping disguised as official business." The letter continued. "I have since learned that the girl was held at that facility for 3 months. I do not know what was done to her there, but I know that in late June she was transferred again. One of my former unit members was hired for additional transport. He told me, years later when he was drunk, that they moved a colored girl from Maryland to a federal asylum in Washington. He said she was in bad condition, malnourished, nonverbal, unresponsive. He said the paperwork classified her as a freed slave suffering from severe mental disorder, no family, no legal identity. He said they delivered her to the asylum, and that was the end of it. When I asked what asylum, he said St. Elizabeth's. When I asked if he knew what happened to her after that, he said asylums like that don't keep good records on charity patients. They overflow with damaged souls from the war. One more lost Negro girl without family would simply disappear into the system." The letter ended. "I am writing to you, Dr. Caldecott, because your name appeared in some of the documentation I saw in 1865. You examined her originally. You tried to protect her with a false report. Your lie was discovered by someone who saw value in her abilities. I believe she was taken because of what you found, and I believe she was destroyed because you could not protect her. I cannot undo my part in this. I can only tell you the truth before I die, so that someone knows. If she is still alive in that asylum, she has been there nearly 8 years, lost in a system that does not care about her. If she is dead, she died alone and forgotten. Either way, I helped put her there. God forgive me." The letter was signed by Thomas Hendricks, captain, late of the 7th Maryland Infantry, dated September 3, 1873. Caldecott traveled to Washington immediately. St. Elizabeth's Hospital for the Insane was a sprawling federal facility housing hundreds of patients, many of them war casualties, soldiers broken by battle, refugees traumatized by displacement, former slaves unable to adjust to freedom's harsh realities. The records were chaotic, incomplete, often non-existent for charity patients. He spent weeks searching through admission records, patient registries, death certificates. He bribed orderlies for access to restricted areas. He walked through wards full of vacant-eyed patients, looking for a young Negro woman who might be Eliza, now 19 years old if she had survived. He never found her. There were dozens of young Negro women in the asylum, many admitted around the right time with vague diagnoses: melancholia, mania, derangement, hysteria. None of the records listed the kind of specific abilities that would identify Eliza. None of the patients he was allowed to see demonstrated any recognition when he spoke to them. Either Eliza was not there, or she was so far gone that she could no longer respond, or she was in some restricted section he couldn't access, or she had died and been buried in the asylum's unmarked cemetery where hundreds of unclaimed patients lay in anonymous graves. In October 1873, Caldecott gave up his search. He returned to upstate New York a broken man. He had failed Eliza in every possible way. Failed to protect her from discovery, failed to prevent her abduction, failed to rescue her from captivity, failed even to determine whether she lived or died. He destroyed all his research on racial science. Not just the notes on Eliza, but everything. His measurements, his theories, his publications. He burned them in his fireplace and watched years of work turn to ash. If his career had been built on lies, let it all burn. But he kept 3 items, placing them in a sealed box with instructions that it be donated to the Academy of Natural Sciences 50 years after his death, not to be opened until 1939. In the box, a small blue ribbon Eliza had worn in her hair during their first meeting in Virginia, a page from a medical textbook with notes in her childish handwriting, and a letter. The letter was addressed to whoever finds this, and signed by Samuel Caldecott. In it, he described his examination of Eliza Davis in full detail, holding nothing back. He documented her extraordinary abilities, his tests, his conclusions, his lies. He explained why he had tried to hide her. He described what happened when his protection failed. He wrote about her abduction, her captivity, her disappearance into the asylum system or death. And he ended with the questions that had consumed him. I devoted my career to proving the intellectual inferiority of the Negro race. Then I met a 9-year-old Negro girl who possessed greater cognitive abilities than any person I had ever encountered of any race. I had to choose, maintain my theories and destroy the evidence, or accept the truth and destroy my life's work. I chose a middle path. I tried to save the girl and hide the evidence. But in doing so, I may have caused her death or worse, her imprisonment in an asylum where she lives still with her perfect, unbearable memory. Was I a coward? Should I have told the truth, published my findings, let Eliza become famous and studied and burdened with representing her entire race? Or was I right to try to give her a chance at a normal life? I don't know. I will die not knowing. I leave this question to you, whoever reads this in whatever future you inhabit. What should I have done? What was the right choice? Dr. Samuel Caldecott died on March 17, 1889, exactly 24 years after Eliza's disappearance. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer mentioned his early contributions to craniology, but noted that he had retired from scientific work decades earlier for undisclosed personal reasons. The obituary made no mention of Eliza Davis. The sealed box was filed away in the Academy's archives and forgotten. It was rediscovered in 1941, during a wartime reorganization. Scholars examined the contents, debated their authenticity, but by then, Eliza Davis was too far in the past, too uncertain, too fragmentary to serve as more than a historical footnote. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s brought attention to suppressed cases of black excellence, but Eliza's story remained obscure. She is a ghost now, a brilliant child who may have possessed the most extraordinary cognitive abilities ever documented, who lived through slavery, who briefly intersected with the scientific establishment at a crucial moment in American history, and who then disappeared completely into a system designed to hide and forget people like her. Did she survive her captivity? Did she die in Voss's facility, or in St. Elizabeth's Asylum, or in some other forgotten place? Did her perfect, unbearable memory finally break her? Or did she find some way to endure? We will never know. All that remains is Caldecott's question, and the haunting image of a small girl with eyes that remembered everything, who existed at the intersection of slavery and science, who might have changed history if she had been allowed to live, who instead became one more casualty of a system that could not tolerate her existence. What do you think of Eliza's story? Did she survive? Should Dr. Caldecott have published his findings, no matter the cost to her? Leave your comment below with your theory. If you found this forgotten piece of American history as compelling as I did, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates the complex, often tragic stories hidden in our past. Thank you for listening, and remember, history is full of voices that were silenced, stories that were buried, truths that were too dangerous to tell. Sometimes our job is simply to remember they existed, and to honor their memory by refusing to let them be forgotten completely. Until next time.